Let's go over some of the equipment that you're going to be using from this point forward to handle and train your dog. For starters, we always recommend a really high quality 6-foot leash that's leather in particular. This material is going to feel the best in your hands. It's going to be the easiest to handle, and it's also going to be the safest type of material as far as ripping and breaking and things of that nature if you're conditioning it and taking care of it well. I can't say enough about having a high quality 6-foot leather leash. We can give you some links of where to get one if you don't have one already, but once you feel and experience having a leash like this, you won't go back to whatever you were using in the past. The next piece of equipment on the list is the prong collar or the pinch collar. So right off the bat, I kind of want to dispel any myths that are out there about this collar. They are not abusive. They're actually very safe and highly effective collars. And during your time and your follow-up sessions and the videos and things like that, you're gonna have a lot more understanding about why. You know, a lot of people, I mean, they look a lot more barbaric than they are, but actually these collars are really safe. They create a 360-degree displacement of pressure around the dog's neck, so there's never blunt force trauma on the trachea or other sensitive parts of the anatomy. And they are actually a very well designed collar as far as, this is very rounded, dull, it's not pointy, it's not sharp, it's not going to put a hole in your dog's neck. The idea behind these collars is that they literally create a pinch and a release. They don't strangle the dog. They don't cut off the artery the way a choke chain might. They don't run the risk of creating structural skeletal damage like the Halti. What are they called? The Halti. I'm blanking on what they're called. Anyway, don't use them. It doesn't matter. But these are really, really awesome tools, and I think you'll find that the more you know about it through our lessons, the more you'll really appreciate this as a tool. So for starters, I'm going to see if I can show this up close in the camera. These collars are designed to actually pinch this piece right here, pinch into this piece here, okay? So they can be taken apart or put together at any place on the collar. To get it apart, I'm going to push my thumb into this piece and again kind of pinch and pull up to take the collar apart. They do not go over the dog's head. That would mean that they were much too big. We'll go over the fitting for your specific dog. But practice, if you have the opportunity before this is on your dog, to pinch these together. It's actually slightly flexible, and when the collars are brand new, it's much stiffer. But you just kind of pinch these two ends into this area here on the other collar. So it'll look just like this. It's a funny angle, and it goes like that, okay? So when you put this on your dog, what's really important is that you make sure everything is very straight. You don't want any twists anywhere, or it's going to screw up the effectiveness of the collar and potentially cause it to malfunction, pop off, or something of that nature. So make sure everything's straight. And when you put it on your dog, you just wrap it right around their neck and attach it to itself. When you attach your leash to it, you're going to be using this little swivelly piece. This is the piece that's actually going to constrict the collar and create the function of it. If I were in, this is called the live ring. It makes the collar live. If I were in a situation where I wanted my dog to be able to lean on the collar a little bit and I didn't want it to constrict or be used in sort of like a correction form, I can actually take my leash and hook it to both rings together. So as you can see, now it doesn't constrict it. It kind of takes away the effectiveness of the collar on purpose. And then if you needed to go back to using it for corrections or what have you, you can put it back on the little swivelly ring, okay? So that's just a quick overview of the prong collar. Now, the main thing that I want to go over in this video is actually the electric collar. So chances are that you have ordered a collar through us, in which case you'll be using a Dogtra collar, which is a brand that we've stood by for, decades. It's a really, really high quality brand. There's a lot of research and detail that goes into these collars. They're expensive and they're awesome. They're worth it. Again, this is a piece of equipment that should certainly last you the lifetime of your dog and possibly beyond. The parts and everything are very easy to replace to work with Dogtra. It's just a really great company. So let's talk a little bit about some of the myths going on with this piece of equipment before we get into anything specific about how to use this. For starters, people ask right off the bat, does this electrocute my dog? No way. In fact, I hate when people even call them shock collars because we're not shocking the dog. It's an electric stimulation, but it is not electrocution. It's a lot more similar to static charge. If I had to compare it to something, I might say it's more like a TENS unit, like they use in physical therapy, or even like literally getting a static shock on a doorknob or something like that. It's really benign. So, as far as questions like, can it burn my dog? There's a picture on the internet there's a million pictures on the internet of dogs with holes in their necks and things that look like big, intense burn marks. That's not from the collar itself. That's much more likely a collar that was on a dog far too long. Those are pressure sores or hot spots. That was a collar that was used absolutely incorrectly, and we would never advise you to have a collar on that tight or for that period of time or without being moved, or if the dog were wet and the collar stayed in one spot. It is absolutely not from the stimulation from this collar. It's not possible to burn your dog with this collar. It does not produce heat at all. I mean, go grab some toilet paper if you want and try to light it on fire with this. It's not going to work. So that's just something I wanted to review real quick. I'll check my notes to see what else I wanted to mention. So we'll get right into, people ask things like, is it painful? Like again with the electrocution question. Now, this collar is designed to create at times an uncomfortable stimulation to interrupt something that the dog is doing. For instance, if your dog were running towards the road, chasing after a deer, and you didn't want your dog to get killed, absolutely I'm going to go to a higher level if that's what it takes to save my dog's life. But on a regular basis, what we're going to be doing is using a really detailed level that we've established through training to communicate with the dog in whatever given scenario, whatever we need. Now, old collars and also cheap collars, if you just go out to your pet store and buy whatever collar for, $50, those are not designed well at all. And in fact, I do believe that they can be really painful because there are too little number of levels. So for instance, a lot of those collars have like 8 levels, and the difference between 1 and 2 and 3 is far too drastic. These collars have 127 levels. So the difference between each level moving up and down on the collar is highly detailed, which is really cool because you can get really specific about what your dog responds to without being too much or too little in either direction. So the first thing that we have people do, and this is a 100%, it's a requirement before you put this collar on your dog, is to feel it on yourself. Because 99.9% of the time, people are pleasantly surprised at how the collar feels. That's going to be really important when you get your collar. The first thing you're going to do is put it on yourself. Sorry, but you'll be happy that you did. So here's your Dogtra collar. You have a remote, and you have the collar itself, the receiver, and you're also going to have a charger that comes in the box. Now, of course, there is a guide to how to use the collar and everything like that, but I'm going to go through some of the basic functions and how we use the collar. So number one, you're going to have a blue button on the side of your remote. You're going to press and hold that down to turn it on, and you're going to see that my LED screen lit up blue. And this is going to be the screen that tells you the function and the number that you're using on the collar. It's maybe hard to see. But anyway, you have a dial up here that changes the number on the screen so you know what level you're using on your collar. You also have a blue button on the receiver. So you are actually going to press and hold that as well. And on the other side, this green light is going to blink when it's turned on. This light will also start to blink orange and then red as the collar is losing its battery. Every single time, as a habit, as a rule in my life, every single time I turn on my remote and the receiver, I press this button on the front of the collar, which is the pager button. It makes the receiver vibrate. And I do that to make sure that I turn my collar on. I can't tell you how many times people have called me and said, my collar's not working, my dog's not listening. And it sounds silly, but the first question I ask is the receiver on? You know, did you only turn the remote on? And sometimes that is a problem that people have and they feel very silly, but I'm glad that that's the easy solution. So I press and hold the blue button, press and hold the blue button, and then I'll hit this pager button, which vibrates the collar. You can probably hear it, so that I triple check that it's on. If at any time my dog's not responding in a way that I want them to, or it feels like it's functioning kind of weird, I'll walk up to my dog and I'll actually hold the box as it's on them, and I'll hit the pager again just to make sure that it's functioning right. Now, when you try the collar on yourself, I recommend using your forearm, and you're going to want to put both of the prongs against your skin. If both are not making contact, the collar is not going to work. So that's going to be the exact same thing on your dog's neck. I recommend starting around, let's say 15. A lot of people can't even feel it on 15. Then we're going to use this little button on the side that's like a braille N for Nick. This button is going to be the stimulation that we use the most often. Each time you hit this button, it is going to send a stem to the collar. So when you try it on yourself, first try the Nick. So this is on 15, it's on my forearm. I personally cannot feel 15. So maybe I can barely feel it. I'm gonna go up to 20. Just 20. Okay, that I can feel a tiny bit. Everybody's different. Every dog is different. You're either going to be really sensitive to it or not, but that's why we do this. So figure out what number you can feel it on and try it on yourself. It's really not that bad. So as I mentioned, this Nick button, the one that we were just using, this is actually going to create a stem each time you press it. The smooth button below it is the continuous button. As long as you press and hold this button, it's going to kind of give like a rapid fire. So it's going to be giving the stem for as long as you're holding it. What's great is that these collars have built-in mechanisms to protect the dog from misuse, where it does automatically shut off on its own after a few seconds. It says somewhere in the manual how long that is exactly, but you can't just indefinitely be, hitting your dog with this button. So if you want to feel what the continuous button feels like, and I recommend you do, turn the collar down a little bit. So maybe we go down to 12 or 15, because it does intensify the feeling a little bit. Oh, I can't feel it on 12. Let's try 15. Woo! That's a lot more intense. We're only ever going to use that button if we really need to. If I need to get a response from my dog that the Nick is not providing, absolutely I'll go to the continuous to go above the dog's threshold and find what's going to make them respond to me, especially, and pretty much only in an emergency. So anyway, those are a couple of the buttons. We have the Nick button, the continuous button, we have the pager button in the front, the on and off switch on the side, and on the top we have the dial that changes the level that we will be using. And as I mentioned, that comes up on the LED screen in the front. You also have the battery level on the front as well, so you can tell if your collar is dying. All right, so as far as fit is concerned, What's really important, and this is going to vary from dog to dog with the type of coat they have and how much skin is on their neck, like different little nuances about the type of dog. But the idea is that it needs to be snug enough that both of these prongs are tight to the neck. Because as I said, if both are not touching, it's not going to work. So here's a couple things to take into consideration. Number one, we want to be conscious of where we're putting it on the dog's neck as far as what we're doing, what function we're using the collar for. If I'm practicing general recalls, for instance, and my dog is going to be loose and he's going to be sniffing and doing things like that, I actually tend to put the collar slightly to the side because as the dog puts their head down, the contact points often come away from the neck. So when he's sniffing, you're going to have a hard time making contact to communicate with your dog. So occasionally, sometimes if I think I can't get my dog's attention and his head is down, I might hit the pager button, which is pretty intense. Dogs actually usually hate the pager more than they hate the regular stimulation. I might hit the pager button to get my dog to lift his head, and then I'm going to go back to using my regular nick function to get the response that I need with whatever we're working on. So you're going to make this collar pretty snug on your dog's neck. You do not want to put it so snug that you can't get your fingers underneath the strap here. And you don't want to affect your dog's breathing. You will actually hear if it's too tight. They'll start wheezing like that. Definitely loosen it at that point. But if you're out on the walk or you're doing something and you're like, man, I feel like I'm just not making contact with the dog, definitely try to make it a little tighter. What you're going to want to do also is with a dog with a little more coat, like these shepherds or any dog with a double coat, when you do put it on, you're going to want to take the box and kind of wiggle it back and forth to make sure that it's through the coat, okay? So the collar is going to be a little snug. That means that you're not going to want to leave it in one place for a really long time. Every once in a while, as you're working with your dog, let's say you're leaving this collar on your dog all day, which is okay, but move it around. If it's been here for a little while, move it to the other side, move it to the middle. Just make sure that it's not creating a pressure sore, as I mentioned earlier, where it's going to harm your dog in any way. So a couple things about the Dogtra collar. These collars have a 3/4 mile radius, which is pretty amazing. Your dog can be very far away and this works perfectly. The other thing is that they're waterproof. So your dog can go in the water with this collar. It is not going to electrocute your dog by any means. If anything, it's actually going to lessen the effectiveness of it. These collars were definitely designed for working dogs, for hunting dogs, for dogs who are doing retrieves in the water, so they are very, very safe to get wet. They're very durable, and they clean off super easily, so you can let your dog go beat the hell out of this thing. They hold up really, really well. So let's talk about some of the things that we use the collar for, the way that your dog understands the collar, etc. When we first introduce the electric collar to dogs here, it is through all positive means first. So it follows up an exercise that we do in the first week or two, typically the first week that the dog is here, where we're teaching them, I don't want to get too deep into dog theory in this particular video, but we basically teach them to come to us on a long line with leash pressure. A few weeks after that, once the on-leash training has been established, we take that same exact exercise and we pair it now with the electric collar. So it's a concept that the dog has already seen, and we just pair it with a different stimulus, which is why it's not stressful to the dog. And a lot of other concepts in this exercise are not stressful to the dog either, which I'll get into in one second. What can be abusive and what is often very abusive about these collars is that people who do not know what they're doing go out and buy one, they slap this on their dog, and they just start hitting the button for whatever they feel like. It's extremely unfair because this is a very unnatural stimulation for a dog. When you don't teach the dog first how to respond to it, what it means, where it's coming from, It can be very confusing. It can be terrifying for a dog to have this box strapped to their neck and a stimulation happening that they have no clue how to answer. So, for sure, there are some things that you're going to hear where these collars are abused, but in this training program, just don't worry about it. You'll see yourself that when you put this collar on your dog, he'll actually get really excited because it means it's time to go out and have fun and enjoy life and be free and off leash and whatever else. It means good things. So, what we did was we figured out with your dog what the lowest stimulation level possible is to get him to respond. And because of the previous exercise we did, your dog actually figured out very quickly that when he feels something funny like this collar and he's not sure exactly what it is, that when he comes back to us, he's rewarded really, really, really heavily with food. So initially, this collar becomes like a little silent pager. On the lowest level that we can get a response out of, we tap, tap, tap with the nick. Your dog feels it and says, I don't know what this means, so I'm going to head back to her. When he does, the collar completely turns off. There's no more stimulation, so the highway opens to come back to me and get a ton of food. Now, once that piece is established, then we switch it over to becoming a little bit of an aversive. At that point, when the dog is coming back and forth to me really well, then I start to add the come command. So he's already kind of in a pattern of coming back and forth, and I start to say, come. If he did not come, the collar would turn on. So that would communicate to the dog in that space that he needs to leave the space he was in, and that in order to turn this off, in order to turn this feeling off, he needs to come back to me, in which case he's rewarded. So that's a very broken down way to explain how your dog understands what the collar means. It's spatial, just like every other type of aversive or any other type of correction, where the dog learns that whatever happened in the space he was in order to turn the pressure off, he has to leave that space. So if this is a recall, for instance, and he's far away from me, if I turn the collar on, my dog says, I gotta move, and the only place to go that turns the collar off is back to my handler. So the other things that, in addition to the recall that your dog will understand about the collar, things that we do use it for are incessant whining and barking, whether that's in a crate, in the car, at the back door, it doesn't matter. You don't even have to say anything. You can have your dog at a distance doing whatever incessant vocalizing, and you can actually touch the dog with the collar, tap, tap, tap on this nick button to make the dog be quiet. The dog will puts together very quickly, and it may have already been taught here. It's likely that it had been taught here, that when it feels the collar, it needs to make a change in something. So if it's in a crate or if it's at the back door, if the dog will figure out very quickly that because he was quiet, it turned the collar off. The other thing that we can use this collar for is jumping on things. So if it's counter surfing, if it's jumping on the back door and scratching at it, which is a really common thing, if it's jumping on people, we can make those things sort of electric, so to speak. So I can be inside my house watching TV with my remote collar on my dog. I'm sitting on the couch with the remote. Let's say my dog wants to come in and pester me. He's frustrated that I'm not letting him in. He starts scratching at the back door. I go tap, tap, tap on my electric collar. Now it's as if the door became electric, and the dog says, oh, I better not touch that, and moves away from the door. Now, if the dog were to come back, or in the previous example, if the dog were to start whining again, I would increase the level, tap, tap, tap again, and I would do so until the dog left the behavior. Sometimes people use this for, if the dog is digging in the garden or something like that, they see the dog go to the garden, tap, tap, tap. If the dog goes to begin to start digging, you can kind of create scenarios where the dog and the collar are figuring something out together. So here's a little caveat about that. Anytime that I am able to make a manual correction on my dog, I'm going to. I do not, under any circumstance, want to overuse this collar. I get a little bit trigger happy. Because then what you're going to do is you're going to create a dog who respects the collar and not you. So occasionally, if I need to kind of create like a phantom collar situation with the barking, with the whining, if it's something that I want to be able to control from a distance without my physical presence there, yes, I will use the collar. However, if it's something that I can manually make the corrections on the prong collar for, I want to make it very clear to my dog that the corrections are coming from me. It's not the collar that manages you, it's me. Okay? That being said, here are some things that we do not use the collar for. The biggest one is dog aggression. I'm not going to ever stem my dog when he is in aggression, especially around another person or around another dog. One thing that you need to understand about this collar, as I mentioned, it is an unnatural stimulation to a dog. So sometimes in certain contexts that they have not been taught, we've taught the dog many contexts with the collar to help them through situations and understand how to respond. But for instance, if your dog were in a dog fight and you started hitting this button, the odds of your dog thinking that the stimulation was coming from the other dog and actually increasing in his aggression is extremely high. So you also want to be careful if your dog is getting confused and he's near another dog or near a person and you're using the electric collar, that you're very careful to read your dog that he's not going to associate what's happening with the collar to whatever he's near. We're going to go over a lot of those nuances together if that's something that might come up for your dog, so don't feel like you have to know all of that going into it. I'm just throwing some concepts out there so that you understand, sort of prime your brain for the things we're going to be talking about. Your dog will also be familiar with having the electric collar paired with many of the on-leash commands where you can take them off-leash as well. So that goes for the easy and that goes for the relax. The really cool thing about this is that even though you might not intend to have your dog off-leash in public in these commands, for instance, you'll be able to use the collar to correct your dog for things, which can be a lot nicer, a lot more subtle to do when you're in public areas where you don't want to be manually correcting your dog. However, do not get in the habit of doing that. Do it when it's necessary. Do it when it's going to help your dog. But as I mentioned, whenever you can manually correct your dog yourself, you really need to be doing it. Do not put yourself in the position where your dog respects this collar and not you. It's a big, big trap. And you'll find that there are many people who have gone to trainers who are super electric happy, where they say, as soon as this collar's off my dog, he doesn't listen. Well, that's what happens. The dog never really learned that things are coming from you personally and not this phantom thing on its neck. So let's see, what else should I cover? I think that's a really great start to understanding what these are. Oh, here's a big point. When you're using both collars together, the prong collar is always going to be up high on the neck, and the electric collar is going to be below it. And there are going to be many, 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 many times when you do have both pieces of equipment on your dog. Sometimes you're using only the prong collar, sometimes you're using both. But when you use the prong collar, you're going to want to have it up very high on your dog's neck because that's where they're the most sensitive. Down low, they're extremely strong, so you're not going to be very effective with your leash handling when your collar is too low. Because this collar doesn't need to be high up to be effective, it's always going to go on the bottom, and the prong collar is always going to go on the top. So, one of the big questions that I want to address before I jump off here is lots of people say, is the goal to come off of the equipment? Shouldn't my dog be so well trained that I don't need a prong collar and I don't need an electric collar? If you've asked yourself this question, then listen closely to this. My question back is, are you ever such a good driver, or is your goal to ever become such a good driver that you no longer wear a seatbelt? And of course the answer is no. And it's because it's not just about you and how good of a driver you are. Life happens. Things go wrong. Other people make mistakes that endanger you. Things that you can't foresee happen. Tires explode. What have you. We could think of a million examples. It's no different than your dog. I would much rather any day of the week to have my equipment available to me and not need it than be in a situation where I really truly needed that and it wasn't there for me. So absolutely keep this equipment on your dog whenever you anticipate or whenever you don't anticipate using it. Sometimes when several months or years go by, people will contact us and maybe need a couple of pointers about things that got a little loose over time. For instance, just recently somebody told us that his dog was taking off after deer, and this was something that he hadn't been doing in quite some time, and it was catching him off guard and surprising him. My first question is, why aren't you using your electric collar? Why, do you remember how to use the electric collar? And he said, well, I've been really lazy. I haven't been putting it on. Well, this could be nipped in the bud in one moment to stop your dog and save your dog's life from chasing that deer. And if the collar's not on, then you're screwed. There's nothing you can do. You can't run as fast as your dog. You can't touch him. You can't do anything. That's the real magic of the electric collar, is that you can communicate with your dog from anywhere, from a distance, with or without a leash. And it creates this tremendous sense of security and control and safety. So use the equipment. Do not make your goal that you come off of it. Make your goal that you don't need to use it. But there are going to be situations all the time, just like anything ever in life, where questions pop back up, where you find yourself in a scenario where you need to be having more conversations with your dog about how to behave, give them feedback about their environment, get control really quickly. Animals are animals, okay? So this is going to be a lifelong process that you're maintaining your training, and you cannot maintain the training without the proper equipment. So there you have it. We've reviewed some of the myths, some of the stuff that comes up about the equipment. I want you to try it on yourself. I want you to get really good at practicing how to use the collar. One thing that I would love to see people practicing is using the collar where they don't have to look at it. I don't like people looking down and then looking at their dog and then looking down and looking at their dog. That's too much time is passing. So get good at turning the dial and hitting the button at the same time, for instance. Obviously, practice that when it's not on your dog. But just get used to what it feels like to handle the remote. And as often as you can, practice opening and closing the prong collar, taking things on and off. Just get used to this equipment in your own time. And then when you go out to use it, you're kind of already familiar with it, and you just have to get accustomed to a little bit more in the way of the nuances that come up. So I trust that helps. I will likely be making another video about how to use the collar for the Come Uncalled, but I just wanted to review, not so quickly, how to use the collar and what all the functions are. So any questions, reach out and let us know. Good luck.